Northwest 255, runway 3 center, turn right, heading 060, clear for takeoff.
Victor 060, cleared to go, Northwest 255.
Nothing ever can prepare you for this. This was just beyond comprehension.
One of the other paramedics says, you know, you shouldn't park under those planes, you know, right there. One day one might go down, and I said, man, it's 1 in a million, you know.
I've relived the event 1,000 times, and there wasn't anything we could have done any differently for the little girl. There wasn't anything that anyone could have done for the other people involved in that airplane.
This is the only survivor out of about 50 patients we found so far, sir.
I think I was somewhat emotionally numbed by it. You know, I was sort of saying, well, this isn't real, this is like a movie set.
Everyone, of course, experiences death, but having so many people die at one time in a local community, it's a monumental thing to occur. There was such widespread grief and concern from the metropolitan Detroit area and through the state.
I just kissed him on the cheek, and I put my hand on the door of the car, and something just kind of checked me. And I turned around and I looked at him and I says, Harry, you be careful. I love you. And he says, don't worry about it. He says, I'll be okay. I'll give you a call tonight.
Attention all hospitals. Been a disaster at Metro Airport. Please stand by.
Tomorrow, August 16th, is the first anniversary of the crash of Northwest Flight 255 at Metro Airport, the second worst American air disaster. Flight 255, A Day Remembered, is a documentary presented as a tribute to the men and women who tried to aid the victims of that crash, and as a memorial to the 156 who died that awful August night. It was airborne for a mere 20 seconds, as seen in this safety board simulation. Researchers discounted reports of wind shear and blamed the crash on improperly set wing flaps. How to remember 255 after the little consoling span of a year? Perhaps it's best to remember without flames, but certainly it cannot be recalled without tears. There's something very strange, something terrifying, something numbing, something even strangely alluring about unspeakable tragedy. We try to imagine, try to place ourselves in the midst of the horror. Thankfully, we're unable to do that. Our minds won't let us fully comprehend. That it happened here at our airport for the first time on such an awful scale made it even eerier, more horrifying. We know the area. We see it. We've driven I-94 to the airport, driven Middle Belt Road. It didn't happen out there someplace. It happened here, and we can only try to imagine. It was a moment frozen forever in local consciousness, a moment that pulls on our emotions and lingers. It calls us back to the instant when first we heard, when first we understood that something stunning had occurred. And it lives on in memory, so fresh and so painful, because it happened here.
Jim, we have reports that a plane is down at or near Metro Airport. I can't tell you exactly what happened because I'm still on Goddard Road speeding to the scene, but I can tell you that I can see thick black smoke across the entire horizon. I'm still a few miles away, but something terrible appears to have happened. And again, we have a report of a plane down at or near Metro Airport. I'm on the way to the scene, and we'll have additional live reports when I get there.
I was visiting my in-laws. They live in Taylor, and the weather appeared very threatening. So my wife was 8.5 months pregnant, and I didn't want to get her caught in a thunderstorm, and we thought maybe we might outrun the storm back home because I live in Farmington Hills. So I ran out to the car and I got a portable scanner just to listen to the weather report on it. And the weather kind of passed over, the bad weather. And as I continued to listen to the scanner, I all of a sudden heard on the Wayne County Sheriff's frequency a call for all cars in the county to report to the Sheriff's Field Office at Metro Airport. I couldn't figure out quite what it was. At first I thought maybe there was an alarm at a panic alarm at the Sheriff's Office. Then it dawned on me, boy, this sounds like a plane crash. And I looked up in the sky and I saw this smoke rising over the horizon. So my father-in-law and I jumped in the car. I had a portable radio and two-way radio, and I called the station. I said, it sounds like we have a plane crash at Metro Airport, and I'm on the way to the scene, and send me some help. By that time, they were no longer talking in code. They were talking about the fuselage being here, different parts of the plane being there, and it was quite obvious that there was a real tragedy in the making here. I came up Middle Belt Road to this location here. It was about as close as I could get because the fire crews were parked right over there on the other side of that sign, so this was about as close as I could get. And all I could see was a little bit of flame coming from on top of that building over there, but a whole lot of flame from this point as far north as I could see. It was just a horrible scene, seeing all that flame and all that debris. The first thing I did as I turned to my father-in-law and I said, you know, this is the one thing I've always said I never ever wanted to have to cover as a reporter. And I was right. This is something I really don't want to do, but I knew that I had to do it. And that was my initial thought. Then I guess I was thinking more about getting tape, getting information, getting the story on the air. So I walked into the Flags restaurant to use the phone there. That was kind of fortuitous in a way because there were a number of employees there who, unfortunately, were looking out the window and saw as the plane came down, hit the building. At that point, they didn't know that he had clipped the light pole first, but they saw it hit the building and then go right into the intersection and continue north. As I said, it was half a mile of Armageddon. I've never seen anything like that. I never want to see it again.
When we pulled up to the scene, we parked right here in the middle of Wick Road. The plane came in and hit the top.
Paramedic Ron French was the first emergency worker to arrive at the scene. Ironically, his ambulance had been parked just 1 mile from the crash site. He and his partner had been watching takeoffs and landings that night at Metro Airport.
Our area for that day was Romulus, which we call the 2 area, and our unit number was 2. We were just sitting in our area, so we didn't have any calls at the time, so we just sat, you know, watching the planes land. There was a big gust of wind that came up. We were sitting inside of the unit. A lot of the people were outside, and when the gust of wind came, everyone, you know, it blew dust up in everyone's eyes, and they started getting into their vehicles. And I was watching this one older lady to the right of me. We were parked on an angle at which we could not see Middle Belt and Wick. I was watching the older lady to my right, and she stayed out, and everyone else had gotten into their vehicles. And it looked like it was, you know, it was going to be like a thunderstorm because the clouds came rolling right in, and the wind was rocking the ambulance. And then I was watching the lady. The wind was blowing her hair, and she was covering her eyes, and then she shaded her, you know, her eyes with her hands. And then she screamed, "Oh my God!" And she grabbed her hair, and she pulled her hair, and I said, "Damn, what is she looking at?" You know, and I turned to look, you know, to see what she was looking at, and I saw just flames by the white tank farms. The whole sky was all fire, and the fire mushroomed. It looked like almost like a nuclear explosion, but it was fire, it wasn't smoke. So at that point, I turned the lights on and I called dispatch to tell them what was going on.
Alpha 202 to Limsworth. Ahead, please. Yes, ma'am. We have a disaster situation out here in Middle Belt and Wick. I need the status of the hospital, please. Please move to mid-channel 3 and I will contact the hospitals for you.
The plane came in, it took the top of the Avis building off, knocked the fence down. There was 30 or 40 cars on fire. The street here in the corner, the traffic lights were down. The street was nothing but fire, probably 12, 13 feet high. It was just all fire all the way down Middle Belt. After I had rolled up, we backed up a little bit because we were afraid that there was going to be another explosion with the fuel sources on each corner. Oh, you can see where the grooves in the road, where the plane hit on the road here and gutterballed its way in. The grooves are still here a year later, so they're a little deeper. They're probably 4 to 5 inches deep the night of the crash. I kept telling our people on the radio, you know, we just stay in the unit. We probably have 100% fatality. you know, at 300 miles an hour. You can imagine at 50 miles an hour when a car hits a viaduct, what happens. I just kept saying to myself, when I did get a moment, you know, I just said, damn, this is a nightmare. When I went home, I just went and hugged I have a little boy at home. I went to hug him just to make sure he was all right. And, you know, it just got emotional when I got home and I see him, make sure he was all right.
It was the second deadliest plane crash in U.S. history. 156 people perished in the heartbreak of 255, an awesome and unbearable loss of irreplaceable lives. But somehow fate decreed that there would not be a 157th victim.
We received a phone call from our dispatcher informing us that an airplane had gone down over near Metro Airport, and for us to respond both units. You read about things on this grand a scale, you hear about it, and it still doesn't really prepare you for what you're about to see. You know, there wasn't a lot for people to do. The section that we're referring to is the north side of the crash. We were the first ambulance on the scene. Fire was already here before us. When we approached, we parked our ambulance approximately where I'm standing, but on the other side of the road. The cockpit was also laying about right here. There wasn't anything there that we could do, so we went ahead and left our unit and walked farther down to where the people already were, the rescuers were already searching for victims and for survivors. At that point, they had gone ahead, located a group of bodies, and they were sorting through those as best they could to try and locate where the source of a moaning was. One of the fire personnel had gone ahead and heard some crying, some moaning, something, and gave us something to center our attention on. It was at that time the little girl was located. We went ahead, we got her out from underneath the rubble, removed the strap that was on her, treated what injuries we could. We went ahead, got her loaded up into our ambulance, at which time we were able to do a more thorough assessment. She was actively crying. She never quit crying. I'm glad. Let me know that you know, that she was still there. She was still breathing. She was still, you know, actively moving about. I have an 11-month-old, and that's a good sign.
The little girl was Cecilia Sheehan, and her painful crying can be heard on a recording made during her ambulance ride to the hospital. The only survivor of 255, the only survivor of her family of 4, 4-year-old Cecilia became known as the Miracle Baby. Her cries on this edited tape are almost too much to hear, too much to bear. But balanced against a famous picture of a recovering Cecilia 2 months later, and put in light of the heroic work done by paramedic Schroeder and partner Pam Davidson, her screams can truly be seen as the sounds of life, the only good sounds to arise from the wreck of 255.
Go ahead. Annapolis Hospital, 82 Alpha, 848 paramedic station, beach now from plane crash. How do you copy? Priority 2. Loud and clear, go ahead. Okay, we have an approximately, looks like a 4-year-old little girl was found alive in the wreckage. She has a very painful airway, actively crying at this time. She has a large laceration of the skull area from frontal all the way back to the occiput on a lateral baseline.
As the ambulance sped to the hospital, the medics coolly and professionally related the injuries and medical data of the little girl.
Heart rate's approximately 160, respiratory status is 34. Unable to obtain a BP at this time, but I assume it would be rather up there in the good range. Our ETA to your facility is approximately 5 to 6 minutes. Do you require any further information from us? Oh, by the way, we do also have on high flow O2 via non-rebreather. How do you copy? Loud and clear. Did you want any medical control or you got everything? Unless you need us to do anything more, just be patient until we find some faster.
Roger, we'll be expecting you.
Okay, thank you very much. 82.
We were fortunate. Pam has kept in touch and with the family, and I got to go up and talk with the family afterwards. I think I needed that to give me something to reach out to, something for me to try and make sense of the whole situation. On the whole way out to U of M, I tried to think, what would I say to this family? What comforting words can I say? And I was just at a total loss for words, and about all I could do was apologize that there wasn't more that we could do, that we wanted to do more, but we weren't able to. There was a lot of crying, a lot of hugging, a lot of comforting. They went ahead and took me in the room, along with the others, and that was the first time since the actual airplane disaster that I got to see the little girl. That was about 2 days later, I believe. I've relived the event 1,000 times, and there wasn't anything we could have done any differently for the little girl. There wasn't anything that anyone could have done for the other people involved in that airplane disaster. There was nothing more to be done.
Today, Cecilia lives with relatives in Alabama. When contacted recently by phone, her guardian, an uncle, understandably refused to discuss her condition, citing media pressures. When asked if she was physically okay, however, he paused long seconds before replying, "Just say she's getting better." The miracle baby lives, but she will carry physical and emotional scars for the rest of her life. Picking up the pieces. It's a ritual in an air crash, just as a community and the individuals most directly affected by the loss of 255 must pick up and go on. For those who responded to the horrible scene, it can be a difficult adjustment. Dr. Kenneth Wolf, director of the Sheriff's Disaster Response Team, was one of the many who was there in the deadly concrete valley that night.
I think that when you witness such death and destruction, it makes you really question your values and priorities as to what's important. You know, what does it mean to be alive?
As Ken Wolf dealt with the needs of emergency personnel, Pat Kakula, an executive of the Hagaira Programs, a mental health organization, worked with the families of those aboard the plane. Her efforts included helping in the painful task of making identifications at the nearby morgue.
They wanted to know exactly, if they could, what happened, how people felt, what did it feel like for them, were they in pain, did they suffer, did they know it happened. From seeing all the grief and the pain and feeling badly for those that had lost their family, you wanted to come home and hug your family and see that they were well.
Again, family. And for some, the families they would go home to those nights, any nights, would never be the same. Sarah Brown lost her husband, Harry, in the disaster.
I was 11 and he was 13, and his family came to our church, and puppy love, I guess everybody called it. And I never had another boyfriend. In fact, several people have said to me, "Sarah, do you think you'll ever marry again?" And I look around me and I say, I don't think so. I couldn't find anybody who would compare to him. We had a daughter in the hospital that was hit with a car, and she was just recuperating, just coming out of a coma. And Sunday afternoon, he had been down at the hospital while I was preparing dinner, and he came home and ate, and I packed him a bag. He had a business trip to Phoenix to go. And he said, "I want to stop back down at the hospital on the way to the airport," because Sharon had been sleeping when he was down earlier. So we stopped at the hospital, and he explained to her that he was going to Phoenix for a business trip. Although she couldn't talk, she seemed to understand what he was saying, and He says, honey, he says, I'm going to Phoenix for a couple of days. I won't be here to feed you lunch, he says, but Daddy will be back on Tuesday. And she shook her head yes, like she understood. And he kissed her goodbye, and we dropped him off at the airport. And I had my little grandson with me because we were guardians of him, her son. And he calls him Pappy. And we dropped Pappy off at the airport. And very casually, because it was such a normal thing to take him to the airport. He traveled all over the world in his business. So I usually just dropped him off, and I did that this night. It was kind of rainy, and I got out of the car and went around to get him my side of the car. I just kissed him on the cheek, and I put my hand on the door of the car, and something just kind of checked me. And I turned around and I looked at him, and I says, Harry, you be careful. I love you. And he says, don't worry about it. He says, I'll be okay. I'll give you a call tonight. He always called me every night. For a long time, I expected him to call. For a long time, I expected him to walk in the door because I was used to him going on trips. I hate it now when the telephone rings 11 o'clock or 11:30. I just don't even want to answer it. At times, in my humanness, I get angry. I don't like to use that word, but at times I think, why me? Where do I go from here? I don't feel that I'm old. I'm middle-aged, but I've got the rest of my life, and what do I do with it? Last night, I was sitting out in the backyard with some friends. We were having a backyard salad dinner in the plains. And you just can't help but look up and see them and think. It's always a constant reminder. It's always there. I think someone who has a loved one that dies with a sickness, where you go on, you know, and you see them progressively get worse, that may be, you're expecting it. But a tragedy like this, when you're not expecting, and when you're so perfectly matched as my husband and I were, we had a good marriage. He was good to me. He spoiled me. He spoiled me rotten. And I miss that. I miss being able to put my arms around him at night, having him there, talk to.
What remains now are the images and the imaginings of our minds. The images are striking. They're frighteningly large and chillingly small. Long scars on the face of the pavement, pieces of tin and fiberglass on a hillside laid bare by a summer's drought. There are the sounds. A little girl literally screaming for her life in the back of a speeding ambulance, her awful wail merging with the whine of its howling siren into an unbearable cry for help. And the silence. The quiet that all who were there that night recall. The silence that shadows the intersection of impact and the hills of fire yet today, even amid the rumble of the unceasing traffic. The ever-fluid life of travel along Middle Belt has returned to normal. But for those who were there, for those who look today and see, and for those who can't forget 255, much can never be the same. And finally, and always, there is Cecilia, that poor child, the miracle kid, that unspeakably tortured little soul, that brave orphaned baby who would not let the devils of death take everything from us in a terrible moment. Her deliverance cannot be balanced against the loss of 156 of us, but it remains, it soothes, it holds hope for those so earnest thoughts that somewhere amid blackness and despair there will come light. She was light. Other things fade. The fire was quickly out, its flames preserved coolly and artificially on television tape. One sees it and sees it and sees it until it loses its power to shock. The cause? It is so important, but then it's not important. A cause is not a human face. A cause is not a remembered smile. A cause is clinical and cold, and it fades into the yellowed print of archival files. A cause is of use to the future. Everything of everlasting importance about 255 was of the past. The search crews could not bring in the pieces that mattered most. That debris was sadly irretrievable. 255. We took it to our souls. It lingers in our minds, in a community's consciousness. But we must, as all survivors must, move on. We stop, look back, then we must proceed. That's the way of this life. There are no alternatives, no choices. just as there was only one way that night. 255 must ultimately be allowed to fly away. We must let it go.
Attention all hospitals, this is HIMSS calling. I've just been notified by Metro Command Post that you need not stand